I would much rather spend a little bit more on the lot and have an excellent location for my rental property than the alternative, because location matters a lot for rental properties. Whereas, all right, welcome everybody. Dan and Mason here for a solo episode. No interviewees today. We're going to be talking or answering listener questions. So these are questions directly from the audience about anything and everything land investing. How's it going, Mason?
Yeah, things are good. I think this will be a fun episode. Our goal with this show is obviously to make and meet the needs of all of our listeners. So hopefully we can answer some of y'all's questions. And if you have additional questions, feel free to reach out to Dan or myself, and we'd love to address them the next time we do a show like this one.
Absolutely. So I see one on here that I'd love to start with. So the moral of the question is, land investing's gotten more crowded. So what are you doing differently today that you weren't doing 2 to 3 years ago? Mason, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I think I'm doing a lot of the exact same stuff that has consistently worked the entire time, which is direct mail and cold calling. So I know that's not the sexiest answer of all time, but within my active land flipping business, it's tried and true, and it's worked forever. But what I am changing or doing differently, we're recording this right now, end of April. This episode will come out sometime in May. I am getting my realtor's license. So I just passed my Colorado broker's exam. By the time the show comes out, I'll be fully licensed in Colorado, and I'm going to use the influx of really bad land investors to my advantage to build out a land brokerage arm of my company, being able to market to landowners that are actively seeking out market price for their land, and be able to meet the needs of those clients by listing their properties for them, as well as representing buyers that I've gotten to meet and network with. So I think it'll add a decent amount of revenue to my company. And it also gave me the ability to sell all my properties in Colorado myself when it makes sense to. I'll still partner with local agents when that makes sense, obviously, but it will be a vertically integrated service line within my current company, which I'm excited about.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. There has been a huge influx of land, quote unquote, investors. There has not been a huge influx of competent land agents. And there's lots of people like me who need good agents. You know, we were just talking about the agent I'm using on some Colorado properties who's asking me questions he should absolutely know the answer to. I gave him some really good listings. And so I'm excited to be able to list properties with you instead. Of course, I guess that means I get to say to people that you work for me.
Yeah, if that inflates your ego, but it is funny of how many realtor referrals we've given each other back and forth throughout the years. And I think that same though of the amount of questions that I answer for agents is insane, whenever it's beyond like the typical stuff that would be actually not beyond what you would typically put on a seller's property disclosure whenever you're selling a piece of land, that the agent who is taking on this fiduciary responsibility for myself or for Dan or any other investor or any other landowner as a client, that they don't know that information, it's staggering. And it just shows how poor of competition there is out there. So I'm excited to work on disrupting this space a little bit. But Dan, what about you? You've been in the land business longer than I have. What are you doing differently now that there's just so much competition?
Well, the main thing is more of the same, like you said, but I am getting better. I'm refining where our mailers, I took a lot of time to redo them this year, and they are producing really well. I said this before we started recording, but I remember late last year, so many of the gurus saying, oh, mail doesn't work as well anymore. It's too crowded. Let's do cold calling. So then there was more of a shift to cold calling, because these people have hundreds and hundreds of followers. So it's non-trivial how many people's actions change because of what these influencers are saying. And so I thought, okay, well, I should probably keep mailing. So we redid our mail, and we are getting an excellent response to very, very well-branded, specific mail, still doing postcards. And then as a corollary to that, we've really built our online presence. So when people Google us, they see, 20 some 5-star reviews on Google, which isn't that many, but it's more than everyone else. They see recent Facebook posts from Front Range Land that show builds we're doing, properties we're buying, variances, rezones, etc. And so we have gotten a bunch of deals recently where my acquisition manager said, hey, they liked the presence we had on Facebook. They know we're real. They see the names match up. They see, properties posted in the area on Facebook. So that's working really well. More of the same, but just doing it better. And so along with that, with my cold callers, I mean, we are coaching and training them every day to get better and better and better. And they are getting better and better and better, especially the one I've had since early 2024 now. He's really, really hitting his stride. And then as far as different, what am I doing that's actually different? Well, I told you before we got on, there's 640 acres. I'm going to call the agent, make an offer on here when we get off the phone. And the goal would be to split that up into 12 to 14 lots, depending on a couple CapEx quotes, and sell them all on terms. And so I'm working to sell more lots on terms. I got a few closing this month or in May that are being sold on terms because I want to get, 15 or 20K in notes paying every month, just to create more recurring revenue. And then, of course, just the interest rate on the capital is great as well. So the main thing I'm doing differently is working to layer in more larger subdivides where I'm selling on terms.
Which it's just a tried and true practice. And I feel like you and I have both met people throughout the country that have been doing this model for a long time. And it works out really, really well. And I think we had a great conversation with John Jasniak about this as well in Texas. And he's selling lots of rural land on terms. And I think it's a really great model. And just like what you said with mail, I mean, yesterday we got a call from someone we sent a mailer like 9 months ago too. And they called us to check in. And I mean, I got this mailer, cover up the brand, but I got this mailer today just from a broker that says we sell Colorado land. And while it's decent, it's very all over the place. And I think something to remember is so often the riches are in the niches, and being able to be very targeted with the mailers that you're doing as versus we sell Colorado land. Like, I don't even know what property this guy was referencing whenever he mailed me, because I own property all over the state. But these people that we're doing business with in Colorado Springs versus Pagosa Springs or versus Pahrump, Nevada, or, Lee County, Florida, or wherever, the more targeted and more specific you can be, I think in general, the better it is. And I think so many people are so lazy in this, where I see people sending me, the templates from Pebble or Postcard Mania or, in any of the popular mailing services or any of the popular coaching programs. I see their exact templates being used that are ultra generic and ultra boring. And I guarantee you guys aren't getting that great of a response because you're not taking 15 minutes or a couple hours to brand your mail and create an actual brand for the business you're working on building. And I think that's probably because you're not really serious about this business, which is fine. It's better for myself. It's better for Dan. But if you want to be serious about it, create something meaningful that's going to be remembered by the people that you're targeting.
Yeah, man, I've got to follow up on this because what you said about being lazy and what a lot of the courses are teaching is such garbage. If you're brand new and you don't have a lot of money, if you have a big budget, I'm not talking to you, but if you're brand new and I only have 1,000 or 2,000 a month to spend on mailers, do not mail entire counties. That is so ridiculous. You need to create really specific, well-branded mailers and then pull specific subdivisions or areas where you can brand the mail for that specifically. We have gotten 4 deals in the last 30 days in one subdivision because we had specific mailers crafted for that specific subdivision. And it takes time, but wow, the ROI is great. And if you don't have a lot of money, you better get a great ROI or you're not going to succeed. And so this has bothered me since the day I started in land, when I heard some of these people talking about, mail an entire county. I'm like, what are you talking about? Again, I got lunch with a guy a couple weeks ago who's sending 100,000 mailers a month. I'm not talking to him. it's a different story. I'm talking to the people who are very constrained financially and just trying to get started. You need to make every dollar count. And this crap about mailing an entire county is obscene. So strongly agree with everything you said, Mason.
Well, and I feel like along this line of questioning, that's a point that we're trying to make is that the beauty of this business when executed well is you're able to have leakage because the margins typically and historically have been so good
Yep.
based on the cost of goods sold and what your revenue becomes whenever you're selling properties at, you know, 80 to 500% of what you're purchasing them for. However, as you grow and scale, that leakage potentially becomes more obvious, or if you're at the very beginning, that leakage is detrimental for you even getting off the ground. Like today, we had a sales training with my sales guy where we only focused on the first 3 seconds of every call that we're, listening to and that we're crafting and honing our script in over and over, because that right there is where the greatest amount of opportunity is within our business, is the amount of people that pick up, we make a first impression, and then they hang up within, 10 to 15 seconds typically. And so that's where our focus area is, as versus like we've got the meat and potatoes of our script, but if we can't actually talk to them on the phone, then it doesn't matter. And that's kind of the iteration that people need to be really focusing on to a certain extent from the beginning. And like everything in business, it's a little bit of a balancing act because you don't want to get caught up in the analysis paralysis, which is what I feel like causes most people to never even take any action. Like start with something and then iterate from there and continue to iterate and perfect. But if you can really narrow the scope on what you're trying to do, I think you're going to have a lot greater success in this business.
Yep. I think that's well said, but we could probably make a whole episode about that, but let's move on. So another question we got is we're currently considering land home packages since we have a couple leads already zoned for modular mobile homes. One of them does not have access to water, so we have questions around how to tackle the water situation or if this, deems it as disqualified. Track sizes to look for, how far to take the utility setup. So I think they're asking about extensions. There's several more questions, but we can kind of tackle this one at a time. You want to kick us off, Mason, on that?
Yeah, I think a few questions answered depending on who you are. So we know who asked this question, obviously, and we know they're in a position to potentially start adding value in the way that they've created their business, because they've created a really niche and targeted business within the state of Tennessee and have built it to pretty incredible levels. But I think the first question is what is the goal of your business in terms of the product or service that you're offering? Because I think you can allow scope creep to occur where you don't have the processes in place or the people in place, and your job, and your business ends up turning into a nightmare of a job. So I think that's the first question. However, when exploring any idea of improvement, it then comes back to what you're seeking out as a return on your investment of, okay, if I get a lead and I'm able to add value through subdivision or utility extension, horizontal improvements, all the way to vertical improvements, what then becomes my IRR? And am I either well capitalized enough or have investors that are backing me that are well capitalized enough and can extend the timeline for those returns that justify what the change in return would be from doing it compared to doing a simple land flip? So that's kind of where I want to start. Dan, you have a lot more experience with new construction. So why don't you kind of talk through your mindset and approach around it from that standpoint?
Yeah. So big picture, finding a value add for your business is excellent. And on our recent episode, we talked about, for the long term, that was the main point, is you need to find a value add, and this could be it. However, I would be wary of what the hot thing is. There's nothing wrong with land and home packages, but some of the big gurus are talking about it because they sell courses that make them money. So they talk about it like it's super easy and everyone should do it. And it's not. It comes with its headaches, just like new construction or subdivides or any other value add equation. One of the guys in our school community got on a support call recently, and he was talking about doing his first land and home package because he bought into the course that I'm referring to. And he said, wow, this was a huge pain in the butt. Now he'll make some money. He knows the system now. He can go do it over and over again, but it's not without its headaches, as is anything. So that's the first thing I would say is just if someone's selling you, oh, how easy this is, they're full of shit. They're just trying to make money off the education. So watch out for that. Now, beyond that, I think your point about can you wait long enough to be able to realize the gain is a big question here because your timeline is going to be more protracted, right? Your cash conversion cycle. And so you need the capital or your investors need to have capital that they're okay sitting much longer, potentially, a year plus. So I would say that. Now, I think you made a few good points. So I'll move on to really specifically answering these questions from this listener. Doesn't have access to public water. Well, what's the norm for the area? So I've got a couple lots I'm selling in eastern Colorado. There are no public water lines out there. Everybody's on the well. That's what's normal. And if I were to do new construction out there, which is a very viable strategy, I would do a modular and I would do a well. And that's just normal because that's the only thing that's available. If you have a lot that does not have public water and everything or most everything around it has public water, well, it's probably not a good candidate. It depends where you are. It depends what the norms are, but this is very market specific is the point that I'm making there. So I can't really answer that without knowing the area, but go ahead. Looks like you want to say something on that.
Yeah, I think there's just so much nuance with anything. So, Dan and I only have our own perspective, but I think where we can potentially take this conversation rather than the sexiness of like the land mobile home package courses and attention that's gotten kind of within the, I don't know what you want to call people like us, the land podcast, social media influencers, Dan and I say with a couple hundred followers on Instagram, but a really attractive component of this conversation is the idea of actual affordable housing, where when you are in a place that allows mobile homes or modular, the amount of questions that I get about that are typically like, it's like city infill lots and people are like, can I put a mobile home on this? And it's like, no, you can't, but you could do it out here. You just are living a lot further from the city. If you can find those markets where people are okay commuting a little bit longer and being able to have truly affordable housing that they're able to put themselves and build themselves or, just have the freedom of doing whatever they want, whether it's living in an RV with a well and septic or actually putting a modular home on it and getting a conventional mortgage. That right there is a huge opportunity just because America has an affordability crisis where I know myself and other decently wealthy people, and we can call it decently wealthy, of accredited investors over $1 million net worth. I'm planning on renting my next home. I'm going to keep my current house as a rental, but I'm going to rent my next home because it's about $1,700 to $2,000 a month cheaper for me to rent than it is for me to buy. And I don't know exactly where my family wants to end up next. And knowing that I am seeing the affordability crisis, being in a decent financial position, I know that middle-class America and lower-class America are experiencing it 10 or 100x to what I am. So being in an affordable market where you can add value, that you don't have to worry about end buyer financing, and I think that's the point I want to drill home here. If you don't have to worry about end buyer financing, where if you're like, okay, I'm going to put a beautiful mobile home on this package in bumfuck nowhere, where the median income is $8,000 a year, and this is going to cost me $700,000. You need to get your head out of your ass and realize that you are creating a vision that you think makes sense versus what the market thinks makes sense.
Yeah, I think that was well said. Affordability is driving everything. If you can create an affordable product, you will do well, but the financeability of that product is really, really important. One more part of this question that I wanted to tackle. I don't think we even read it out loud, but there's quite a few questions within the questions. The listener asked how to approach the builders and design a win-win. And so if you want to do any of these strategies, actually, I'm not sure about mobile homes. because I haven't done it. I don't think you need a general contractor's license. I'm not sure. Mason, do you need a general contractor's license? Because it's not real. It's just a car. Technically, it has a title. Do you need a GC license for that?
I don't think for mobile, for modular,
Yeah,
yeah.
modular.
But for mobile homes, like I think you just need, and it all depends on how you set it up. But I mean, you just need like a commercial driver to come park the thing on your property, and then you can set it up kind of however you want, assuming that that's what it's allowed. But don't listen to myself or Dan on this because neither of us have touched this.
Yeah,
Granted, I've bought homes with crappy mobile homes on them, but it's still been considered vacant land that I'm actually transacting because I'm not touching the title on the actual vehicle historically.
yeah. Well, okay. Check on that depending on where you're doing business. Because I mean, where I grew up in Ohio, you didn't even need a license to build a house. There was no GC license, which is hilarious. But if it's modular or stick built, you certainly need a general contractor. And so she's asking this listener, well, how do I set up an agreement with the GC? How do I find a good one and create an arrangement that makes sense? And this is really key. So if you're going to do a modular, you're going to do a stick built, you need to find a GC who wants to work with investors. And there's pros and cons to this, right? If you have a custom construction company, right, you're probably charging a very high dollar price per square foot to your clients, but you're taking on a lot of headache of building someone's dream home. So you get paid very, very well. That sort of contractor is not going to be who you're going to use to do this. Like the spec homes I build, right? My contractor is certainly not that contractor. On the other end of the spectrum, there are contractors who don't want to deal with custom homes, but they like to build. That's what they do. And they're excited by the idea of being able to pump out a simple product over and over again for an investor without having to get the loan, without having to make the decisions of what they're going to build and how they're going to sell it and how they're going to finance it. They're just doing the building, right? And they don't make as much money, but they don't have to deal with, you know, John and Susie Smith who are building their dream home, right? So my contractor doesn't hear any complaints from me. It's very simple. She's basically pumping out a commodity, right? And so you're only going to figure out which contractors are which by calling around and talking to a lot of people. Now, you're not going to get D.R. Horton to do this for you or any of the big builders. You need a local. Yeah. And so on the other hand, you have the small local contractors who just want to pump out a commodity for a client and not have to deal with selling to end users, retail buyers, not dealing with someone building their dream home, not dealing with the financing. And so my contractor is thrilled to just charge me a set fee, pump out a simple house or duplex, and do several of them a year. And it's a great complement to their main business. And so you have to find that sort of person that wants a lower return but less headache. And then I'll hit on arranging the agreement. If you have anything you want to say, Mason, I can pause.
Well, I can comment a little bit just because I recently sold a piece of property on seller financing to a semi-custom home builder that is building a spec home for in a luxury market. Like I'm looking on Zillow right now, and it just hit the market. I don't think construction's even started yet. For $2.15 million. And I sold them this lot for $400,000, with $300,000 of it seller finance. With that being said, though, one, I needed to move it because I'd been holding the land for a long period of time. And two, I had to allow a subordination clause within my seller financing terms because they're not, self-financing and using cash to build this $2.15 million home. They're using a loan. And with that, most banks are not going to be okay being in a second position, especially if, this home costs them $1.5 million to build. So you have to be willing to be a little bit flexible depending on the type of builder that you're working with. And regardless of the type of builder, that is something that might come up of you having to subordinate your first position on the lien. But with that being said, like, as long as the lien is properly recorded and secured against the land, you're going to be most likely okay. But listen to an attorney don't take my advice on that.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Last thing I wanted to say on this topic is just how to set up the arrangement, because that was one of the questions. How do you compensate them? We've talked about this a lot on prior podcasts. So you can definitely find some construction focused episodes, but it's all about incentives, so ideally there's an upside if they get done quicker and under budget. And then there's a downside if they take longer than anticipated or significantly longer. There's got to be a buffer. There's got to be a buffer both on the cost and the time frame, because there's always some things out of their control. But their incentives have to be aligned. So if you're building just to sell, I would recommend giving them a share of the profits so that you are directly aligned, where the more money you make, the more money they make, and vice versa. So that's how I would recommend doing it. I will say with my contractor right now, they are building for a set fee, but they were referred to me by a friend who'd used them. It's a really small town. They know a bunch of the people I know. We all work with the same people. And so there's a level of accountability created there, because if they screw me over, everyone's going to know, and vice versa if I didn't pay or screwed them over. And so that really helps to hold them accountable as well.
When a deal goes sideways after you're already under contract, what steps do you take to either renegotiate or exit cleanly? So we can take this question, I guess, a couple ways. Let's start with the buy side. And if the deal goes sideways, of what that actually means too, of whether comps come back way different than you expected, or something pops up in the due diligence that wasn't anticipated. To me, it's okay. Step one of, can I renegotiate to get this to be a price that makes sense based on the risk I'm assuming and what my anticipated returns are? And two, if there is no price that I would do this deal, then I'm just canceling the contract. And most importantly, within that is just having enough time within the initial contract to give you the ability to answer all of these questions. So I think sometimes people get caught up in a fear-based mindset, and they're terrified of deals going wrong once you're under contract. I mean, but at the end of the day, most deals don't go through. Even when we get them under contract, usually when we get something under contract, we're pretty confident that we're going to go through with it. But I'd say like at least a quarter of the deals I've ever done that I've gotten under contract, we've ended up not executing on the contract because something was wrong with the property. That's oftentimes a lot of the people that are going to be responding to your direct mail or your cold call. There is something wrong about the property that you're not going to be able to find out without yourself or someone else walking it in person, or something showing up on the title report or something like that. But you just have to give yourself more time in the contract to allow yourself to back out. I think trying to really sell what you're doing, what the model you're doing, by being like, we close in a week, is just dumb. Most of the people that you're negotiating with have potentially owned this property for anywhere from, let's call it 3 to 30 plus years. They don't care if it takes 7 days or 70 days to close. And I think knowing that, you need to give yourself enough leeway.
Number one, a lot of deals aren't going to close. You're going to run into all kinds of just obscure issues. Sellers are going to die. Just crazy stuff's going to happen. Number two, agreed on the closing timelines. And actually, we have one right now where we're having some of these issues where it's a double close, which I've never done before. I've funded other people's double closes. I've never done one. We're under contract to resell. Buyer's trying to renegotiate. Seller, we have extended several times and spending like 100 days, and they don't care. As long as they get their money, they don't care. So that makes your point. But yeah, if you're dealing with infill lots with water and sewer, you're going to deal with fewer falling out because there's less variables. It's incredibly simple. If you're dealing with acreage, PERT tests, well tests, you're going to deal with a lot more properties falling out because of issues of one kind or another. And I will say, don't be afraid to renegotiate if you genuinely find something wrong in your due diligence. So if you go to the lot and it's much lower than it looks online and you're going to need more fill, you can take that to your sellers and just be honest with them. Look, I mean, we can just cancel. Happy to send you a good realtor, or we can buy this at a lower price. Just make sure when you're coming back and renegotiating, you have a legitimate reason why. We try not to do it, but it happens sometimes. Things go wrong, or maybe it doesn't fail a perk test, but you need an engineered septic that's going to be an extra 10 grand. Well, okay, Mr. Seller, we'll buy it at a 10K discount, right? We just did that on one Mason and I are funding in North Carolina. So yeah, it's really deal specific, and what is causing the issue determines how you handle it.
Yeah, I think that's all great advice. And I think that to answer on the sales side of things, whenever it goes sideways, there's not a ton you can do besides potentially having your agent say, what, if any, price reduction could result in this contract being, renegotiated and executed upon. And usually that doesn't work. Usually when people back out and they're at the point of sending a contract cancellation, you're not necessarily going to get them back on the line. At least that's been my experience. When it falls out, it typically falls out. So,
well, one more thing I'd like to say on that, because I'm dealing with this right now. That was why I was almost late to the show. So on that double close, we're under contract to sell 2 lots to a big builder. It's a double close, like I said. So they're balancing the seller still being in the picture, but they, after the due diligence period is over, are now trying to renegotiate from 80 to 60. And they're saying, oh, well, comps aren't this high, which is obscene. The comps are incredibly clear. These are infill lots in Florida. So our realtor immediately responded with, you're an idiot. Here's the comps. And then number 2, oh, they're lower. It's going to need more fill than we thought. Now, I think they think we have no money and can't close, and so they're trying to beat us up. So these are highly desirable lots in a Florida market that is still extremely busy. We had our realtor go out there and walk it, and they might be a little bit low, but it's not very bad. They're not wet. They're not, in wetlands or anything like that. So these are very nice saleable lots, and the prices have gone nuts here. And so in this scenario, I told our realtor to go back and say, if you want to lose your earnest money, great, send the cancellation. We'll still close the contract on our end, or you can close as we agreed to, and that's that, because these are desirable lots. Now, if we're trying to do a double close and it's crappy lots or somewhere with not a lot of demand where we're surprised that there's anybody that wants to buy it, that's a totally different scenario. And so how you handle this depends. If I was worried about selling these, I would be more, okay, well, can you meet us in the middle, or can we get you to come up a little bit? I'd be willing to negotiate. But with these ones, I'm not really willing, because they're trying to bully us essentially right at the end.
That gives us a good transition opportunity into one of these other questions, because I think you being in a position of power allows you to think that way, as versus sometimes we don't feel that way, and that can be associated with the way that you're funding or financing your deals. So another listener question is, when you're scaling up, how do you decide whether to self-fund, bring in investors, or take on debt for larger land projects? Something I like about this question is it feels like we're talking about scaling up, meaning you've already done something, as versus you're completely brand new. Because if you are completely brand new, I do kind of hold the opinion that you should maybe look at trying to fund it yourself, or give an investor almost all of the upside just to get the experience under your belt if you don't have the capital to take down the deal yourself. But I think it's, what can you afford? And that's actually of what capital can you bring to the table, and can you actually afford that makes sense for you and your lifestyle? And 2, what can you mentally afford? I think some of the greatest stress that I have felt in this business is whenever I am risking investor capital to make a deal happen, because I feel like I am no longer in a position of power where I'm okay losing a little bit of money on a deal for myself, if it was a good learning experience. I'm getting better and better at not losing money. I've only lost money maybe 3 or 4 deals, but they're the only deals I ever think about. But with that being said, it's a totally different ballgame, becoming responsible for someone else's hard-earned money. And I think sometimes you forget that if you've been like this freedom entrepreneur person that maybe made a ton of money, whenever the times were really good, that making 50 or 100 or $250,000, that might have taken some people years to accomplish. And if you are not in a place of really consistent and stable operations when you're within your business, bringing on investors it's just like ethically not the best thing to do. And it's a huge stress. But I'll pause for a second because I think we can talk about this question for a while.
Yeah, well, to your point, it's who is the investor? So with some of these larger deals that I alluded to earlier, I'm working with a large scale investor, at least compared to us, who knows land really well and is able to discern and have their own opinion about these properties. Whereas so if you're new and you're unsure and you're not super stable financially, go to one of the funders that knows what they're doing, where there's no moral responsibility on your end because these are competent land investors who are going to make their own decision about whether it's a good deal, right? So I think that's the best way to approach an investor when you're new, and then you can sell from more of a position of strength and have more negotiating power because somebody else funded it who knows what they're doing. On the flip side of that, don't go take capital from your mom and dad or friend or someone who's clueless when you are also clueless, because that's how you get yourself in trouble. You lose other people's money and ruin your reputation, and reputation is everything. Finding more and more. So I think that's the best solution when you don't really know what you're doing yet. And of course, if you can fund it yourself, that's great, right? Because then you can sell from a position of power. If it's not selling, you can sell on terms. I have a few that are just my own money, and they're sitting because parts of Florida slowed down. And one of them's under contract now because I could offer terms because it's my money. So it's fine. I'll get 10% interest, a bit of a spread. It's fine. And you can do that when it's your own money. So I think that's how I would approach it. And then once you're really competent and know what you're doing, then you can take people's money who don't know anything about land and who are just trusting you.
Oh yeah. Well, and what's funny is after enough deals, I don't get that dopamine rush of whenever a deal closes anymore. Where I've got a handful closing, which will result in, I don't know, 80, 85 grand coming back, which I'm like, man, I could use that money. That's great. But I'm like looking at it and it's so nice that I'm not paying any investors off on this. Of when you get that settlement statement, and then you send a huge chunk of that money back. There is a little bit of like, dang, like you had the little bit of an up and then the straight back down, of having to pay, because there's far more dopamine associated with selling than buying, is at least what I've kind of experienced. But I think something else to bring up is the concept of being a newbie again whenever you start scaling. And we did talk about this a few episodes ago, where on larger scale subdivides and bigger deals that I'm doing, like I'm getting really minimal upside. Well, actually, I'm only getting upside, which is really nice. But it's also very different than what historically I'd been doing, where I'd been offering investors single and low double-digit returns on my simple land flip deals. For these investors, they're getting good returns, but I'm new to this space still. Until I've done 100 deals like this, I'll consider myself new. And I think with that, I need to be willing to give up a bigger chunk of the, bigger piece of the pie, or almost all of the pie, to get the deal done. Because if you're good at business and you have enough going on, it's not a big deal of, okay, well, I don't get paid until, we're anticipating, 600 grand in sales from this deal. I don't start getting any pay or any percentage of the profit split until after the first 400 grand has been returned to the investor on a deal that I'm doing. And that's okay to me because I don't feel really stressed. I structured the deal in a way that really makes sense for everybody involved. And I think there's a part of me that maybe 2 years ago, I would have been like, hell no, I'm not giving up this much of a deal. And I better be getting paid, at the same time the investor has been getting paid. But if you are not reliant on one single deal, which puts you in a position of weakness because you're so stressed about, I need the deal to come, to fruition, or A, B, C, or D ends up happening. I think it's just important to kind of change your framework and change your mindset of recognizing as you scale, you're new again. Even if it's just doing more, there are challenges that you're going to encounter that it's not like a linear progression of each step you take puts you one step ahead. It might put you 10 steps back and then 50 steps ahead.
Yeah, I know. This is really important to understand. We've both had to kind of swallow our pride on my basic land flips. I pay very little to nothing in interest unless it goes horribly wrong and sits forever. For these big subdivisions, I'm giving away a big chunk of the pie, but there's two parts to that. The simple land flips, I am responsible for that capital if they don't sell, but I have done so many hundreds of these, I'm really confident in them. And so that's okay. So I pay less interest, but ultimately I'm responsible for it if it doesn't go right. On the flip side, I don't want to be responsible for $1.6 million on this large 466-acre tract that we're supposed to close on this summer. So I approached a really experienced investor who has a lot of money, who's done many of these projects in the same state. I'm giving a large chunk of it away, but I'll have no risk. And so it allows me to get into that next stage without, risking my shirt and everything I've built, so to speak. And so, yeah, I'm glad you brought this up, Mason. Once I've done a few of these and you've done a few of these larger projects, well, if we want to go do a $20 million entitlement deal, we'll probably have to swallow our pride and do the same thing, right? As you level up, you become a beginner over and over again. And that's just the reality of learning and progressing, I think.
Absolutely. So another question here, which we kind of hit on a little bit, but we can more fully answer. How do you underwrite land deals differently depending on the exit plan, like flipping versus holding for development? With this particular one, I underwrite it the same, but this is where the math gets a little bit more fun, because whenever you're calculating your rate of return on something, you're always going to factor in some form of contingency or oops budget. But the problem is, say you get the land at what you anticipate 50%, and so you could sell it, and then you give yourself a 10 to 15% oops margin based on the comps. And then if you're improving it, you get quotes to improve it, whether it's the horizontal or the vertical components of improvement. And I usually add a little bit higher, 15 to 20%, especially up to 25% if I've never worked with the contractor before. And you kind of factor that into every line item within that budget. And then you start looking and you're like, okay, the margin of this deal can kind of fluctuate in between, 20 to 30%, give or take, along each way. But it's still the same calculation for the internal rate of return or return on investment, depending on what you're doing. So I think that's one additional component that I want to talk or wanted to add back to what we talked about a little bit before whenever we were looking at each exit strategy and whether it makes sense. But Dan, you add on to that.
Sure, yeah. When I, for example, am buying lots to build on, a lot of times I do look at it differently. So, for example, I built that duplex last year I've talked about many times, and I kept it. And I bought that lot basically at market value, but it was a really nice lot with killer views, flat. It was a little bit below market, but not much. But it was an ideal lot. And I'm looking at the cost being amortized ultimately on a 30-year loan, mostly. I mean, I have some cash in it, but not a lot. And so when I think about that, I would much rather spend a little bit more on the lot and have an excellent location for my rental property than the alternative, because location matters a lot for rental properties, whereas an extra 5 or 10 grand on a 30-year loan is basically meaningless. We're talking a few dollars a month, maybe 30, 40, I don't know, but not a lot. Okay. So my underwriting was totally different. There's a lot for sale next to a duplex I already own. I'm planning to, if I have to, pay market value for that thing so I can build and keep another duplex there next to a duplex I already have, also a killer location. And so I think about it totally differently because, again, it's going to be on a 30-year loan ultimately. With the spec homes, same sort of idea where I still want to get my land basis down. I'm not as liberal with what I would pay for a lot on a house that I'm going to build to sell because I am ultimately selling quickly. However, again, location matters so much for being able to sell just a nice entry-level home quicker. There's one in the market I'm in that is sitting on the market, and I wondered why. It kind of scared me a bit. Is there something wrong? because it's priced really low. And I realized, oh, it's up against the mobile home park. That's why it's not selling. And I bet he got a good deal on that lot before he built, but now it's sitting. So a nicer lot that maybe I spend five or seven or $10,000 more on can easily make that spec home sell much quicker and at a higher price and save me more than that in interest and and price reductions ultimately. So I know that's not a really concrete answer, but that's because it's very property specific. All right, but that's how I think about it.
No, those are really, really great thoughts, especially for those of you guys that are doing, starting to do new construction. All right. We probably have time for one-ish more questions. Let's see. How do you identify when a piece of land has hidden upside, like rezoning potential, that most people would miss? So this one's a little more tricky because I, in my business, really like to keep things simple, and focus on doing what I know. But I do think that uh, the hidden upside, and I think hidden should be in quotes and italicized, um, really comes from experience in a particular market where I feel like a lot of people will, and we can add downside too. I do a lot of business in the mountains. There are certain properties on a street that will have insane views, beautiful mountain views. And there are certain properties that will look directly into the side of a hill, and people will comp them the exact same that are inexperienced in that particular market. Where why do people want to get property in the mountains? A lot of times it's because they want the insane views. And that's going to be the same thing. There's going to be little nuances and intricacies that you find in every single market that you're operating in that you need to discover, or have a really, really competent local realtor that works with you and for you, that you're able to discover. That way you don't accidentally shoot yourself in the foot, or you actually have a winner. And that can be beyond mountain views. That can be water line extensions or sewer extensions, or high and dry with a certain type of tree on it versus bare land versus forested land. All sorts of different things that you're going to only understand if you're actually doing business in this market, understand the market, and aren't making assumptions based on what you want, and focus on what the end buyer is actually going to want.
Yeah, I'm sitting here. I have a really clear example of how I think about this, and it's same idea, but a little different example than what you just said. So in Pueblo West, where I do all these builds, where I've done more business than anywhere, there has been a road, a thoroughfare that is going to go from Pueblo West to Pueblo that has been planned for a very long time. And doing a lot of business there, I knew about this. And there is a defunct donut shop, a commercial building that's right where this thoroughfare is going to let out. And this is going to be huge for anyone that knows the area. I mean, we're talking tens of thousands of cars a day will go. Maybe not tens, maybe thousands. But I mean, we're a very substantial amount of traffic. It's basically, there's one main highway that everyone's going down. It creates a massive traffic jam every day. And this is going to be the second alternative route. So we're major for the context. Okay. And I haven't been able to get it, but I've been sending letters and trying to get a hold of the owner of this donut shop for a long time. And it's a perfect example of hidden upside, because we knew that this road, this thoroughfare was coming, and they're almost done. I was just down there last week when I was in Colorado, and man, that donut shop is going to have some serious potential to, it could be a lot of things. It could be a car wash. It could be a drive-through for a drive-through restaurant. But there's hidden upside because I know that market so well and what's coming. And so that's a really good example. And you only know these things if you're an expert on that locality, or you have a realtor on your team that can tell you these things.
And one more tactic that I want to add to that is, wherever you are doing business or decide to be doing business or speculate on doing business, look into the local government websites, look into meeting minutes from the Planning and Zoning Commission, from the building department, from development committees. Check the local news, see all sorts of stuff so you can figure out what's coming. Oh, is IBM building a factory, or Zyn, what, the smokeless tobacco, or not smokeless tobacco, the, tobaccoless nicotine product is building a huge factory close to DIA that's going to add a ton of jobs. Their Dream Golf is putting a resort in eastern Colorado, which, Bandon Dunes Golf Resort is a part of that golf corporation. And whenever you're aware of these things, and depending on what your investment thesis is, you might have a really great opportunity to come in and buy land that is worth $20,000 an acre right now that could shoot up to $1 million an acre or per square foot, or whatever metric that you want to use. So I think just being aware of what's going on and having local competent people will help you determine the hidden upside or the hidden downside of maybe that new thing that's coming in might be a just total deal killer that is not worth pursuing, because the best deal that myself or Dan has ever done are the deals that we ended up not doing, because I think they might have killed us. So awesome. Well, Dan, anything you want to leave the audience with as we wrap up?
One of the big themes is being an expert on your area, on your market, and on your niche. I think that's really, really key to a lot of this. But there's one more question I just on here had to quickly hit on. It's asking about issues like wetlands, flood zones, topographical challenges. How do you determine if it's still worth pursuing? I'm glad somebody asked this, because I heard about some data system that scrubs off landlocked parcels or parcels in wetlands. And that, if you're in one given area and those are non-starters, great. But if you're new or don't know the area really well, that is horrible, horrible advice to get rid of those. I've sold so many properties that are partially in wetlands, or there are a lot of neighborhoods in the Carolinas where everything is in wetlands, and that's normal, but it's highly desirable. So people buy it and build anyways, right? It's very solvable. And it's just a matter of what is the demand, right? What is the demand? If you're on a waterfront, in a waterfront neighborhood, in a lot of these markets in the Southeast, everyone's in a flood zone. So why would you scrub that off? That's normal. So it's just what comparable inventory is selling, and if it has the same characteristics, then it's fine. And the last thing I'll say, I've watched this in a number of Colorado markets, and here in San Diego, they're just not finishing, but they're developing Mission Valley like crazy right now. And there's all these condos. Toll Brothers are building these luxury condos. There's these apartments, and my girlfriend lives down there in one of the newer apartments. And it's such a great illustration of how markets progress, where everybody starts with the flat, easy lots. Pueblo West, not a lot of the difficult topographical lots have been built on, because it's not that built out. But somewhere like San Diego, the only thing left tends to be these really challenging lots, and there's massive demand here. So now it's feasible. And those are still lots now, or those are lots now that people are building on and developing because the demand's here. So with any challenging characteristic, it all depends on what is the demand and what inventory is available. If there are only extremely sloped lots in the area and there's lots of demand, well, those lots will sell. If there's only wetlands and lots covering wetlands in the area and there's demand, those lots will sell.
Yeah, I think that's really important to realize, because so many people create rules that are based on one thing they heard from one person that's totally irrelevant to the business that you're doing. And so, it just means you have to put in a little bit of work. Whenever you're looking at comps, go in and look at what the flood zone was, or what floodplain it's in, or if there's wetlands on every single comp and every single property. Spend some time virtually driving, go click on the assessor's website or on Regrid or Land ID, every single parcel in the general vicinity, to kind of check and look and see, okay, if it seems like if it's in a wetland or in a floodplain, it might be selling for this much less or the same amount or more, for all you know, compared to other properties that you're working on and dealing with. So I think that's a great one to end it on. We really appreciate you guys who took the time to write to us and give us some questions to answer. We will try to do this show at least maybe one more time this year. So if you have any questions that are itching to be answered, feel free to reach out to myself or Dan, or post in our school community, or find us on any platform that the Big Picture Blueprint is streaming on. But for now, this is Mason McDonald and Dan Haberkos with the Big Picture Blueprint signing off.